You did not stumble into this. That is the part that changes everything once you finally allow yourself to understand it. The relationship that confused you, that made you question your own mind, that left you wondering how someone who claimed to love you could treat you the way they did. That did not happen by accident. You were not simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. You were not unlucky in the ordinary sense of the word. You were chosen, deliberately, carefully, and for very specific reasons that have everything to do with who you are and almost nothing to do with weakness. You are an empath. And to a narcissist, that is not just attractive. It is everything they have been looking for. This is not a comfortable truth. Most empaths, when they first encounter this idea, feel a complicated mixture of recognition and resistance. Recognition because some part of them has always sensed it, always felt that what happened to them was not random, that they were somehow singled out in ways their friends in healthier relationships were not. And resistance because accepting it means accepting something about themselves that feels on the surface like a vulnerability, like a flaw, like something that needs to be fixed or hidden or protected against. But here is what this audiobook is going to show you, chapter by chapter, with complete honesty and without softening what needs to be said. Your empathy is not your weakness. It is your greatest strength in the right hands. What happened to you was not a failure of your character. It was the result of your greatest qualities being deliberately exploited by someone who had spent years learning exactly how to do that. By the end of this audiobook, you will understand exactly why narcissists target empaths specifically, how the entire dynamic works from the first moment of contact through the slow, painful erosion of self that follows, and most importantly, what you can do, starting today, to protect the empathy that makes you who you are without ever having to become someone you are not in order to stay safe. Your empathy is not your weakness. It is your greatest strength in the right hands. Chapter 1. What makes someone a true empath? The word empath has become something of a cultural shorthand in recent years. It appears on social media posts and self-help books and personality quizzes, often used loosely to describe anyone who considers themselves sensitive or caring or attuned to other people's feelings. And while there is nothing wrong with that broader usage, it has created confusion around what being a true empath actually means, and more importantly, why it matters in the specific context of narcissistic relationships. A true empath is not simply someone who feels things deeply, though they do. It is not simply someone who cries at movies or feels sad when a friend is struggling, though those things are often present. A true empath is someone whose nervous system is fundamentally wired to absorb the emotional states of the people around them, not as a choice, not as a conscious decision to be compassionate, but as an automatic, involuntary process that happens whether they want it to or not. When someone near an empath is in pain, the empath feels that pain in their own body. When someone near them is anxious, the empath's own nervous system registers that anxiety almost simultaneously, often before any words have been exchanged, often without being able to identify where the feeling came from. When someone near them is angry, even suppressed and carefully hidden anger, the empath senses it in the air, in the quality of the silence, in the small, invisible signals that most people around them are completely unaware of. This capacity is extraordinary. In a world that desperately needs more genuine connection, more real understanding between people, more willingness to feel what another person is feeling rather than simply observing it from a comfortable emotional distance. The empath's gift is genuinely rare and genuinely valuable. It makes them exceptional friends, exceptional partners, exceptional at any work that requires deep human attunement. But it also makes them readable. In a way that most people are not. In a way that a certain kind of person, a person whose own emotional radar is calibrated not toward connection, but toward identification of useful targets, can sense from across a room before a single word has been spoken. This is not your fault. But it is something you need to understand clearly before anything else in this audiobook will make complete sense. Chapter 2. What narcissists are actually looking for in a target. There is a common misconception about narcissists and their choice of targets that is worth addressing directly. Most people assume narcissists are looking for someone weak, someone fragile, someone who will simply comply without resistance because they lack the inner strength to push back. This assumption feels logical on the surface, but it is almost entirely wrong. And understanding why it is wrong is one of the most important things an empath can do for their own protection going forward. Narcissists are not looking for weakness. They are looking for specific strengths they can convert into fuel for their own needs. They are looking for warmth, because warmth feels good to be around and makes the early stages of the relationship genuinely pleasurable. They are looking for loyalty, because loyal people stay even when things get difficult, even when the cost of staying rises higher than it should. They are looking for someone who gives generously without immediately calculating what they are receiving in return, because that generosity can be drawn on repeatedly without the social cost of reciprocation. And above all else, they are looking for empathy. Deep, genuine, involuntary empathy. The kind that forgives before an apology has even been offered. The kind that imagines the other person's pain so vividly that it becomes almost indistinguishable from one's own. The kind that will explain away red flags, smooth over rough edges, and return again and again to the belief that the person they love is capable of being better. Narcissists don't gamble. They calculate. And an empath, to a narcissist conducting their quiet preliminary research, is not just a good target. They are the ideal one. Chapter 3. Why empathy is the specific trait narcissists prize most. To understand why narcissists prize empathy so specifically, above almost any other trait they might find in a potential target, you need to understand something about what a narcissist fundamentally needs from other people, and why ordinary relationships can never fully provide it. A narcissist operates from a place of profound internal emptiness that most people who have not experienced it firsthand find genuinely difficult to imagine. Beneath the confidence, beneath the charm, beneath the carefully constructed image of superiority they present to the world, there is a self that feels, at its core, insufficient. Fundamentally unlovable in ways that no amount of external admiration ever fully repairs, because the wound is too deep and too old to be reached by ordinary human warmth. This creates an insatiable need for what psychologists call narcissistic supply. External validation, admiration, attention, and emotional fuel drawn from the people around them. Without it, the internal emptiness becomes unbearable. With it, the emptiness is temporarily quieted, though never permanently filled, which means the need for supply never ends, only cycles and intensifies. Now consider what an empath brings to this dynamic. An empath feels the narcissist's pain, even the pain the narcissists themselves cannot fully access or articulate. An empath forgives instinctively. An empath returns to the relationship again and again because their own emotional system keeps pulling them back toward the person they sense is suffering underneath the behavior. An empath provides an almost bottomless supply of patience, understanding, and emotional generosity that an ordinary person would have withdrawn long before. To a narcissist, this is not just useful. It is extraordinary. It is everything they have been looking for across relationship after relationship, rarely finding it in such pure and sustainable form. Your empathy is not your weakness. It is your greatest strength, in the right hands. Chapter 4. The love bombing phase. Why it works so powerfully on empaths. Love bombing is the term used to describe the overwhelming flood of attention, affection, and apparent devotion that narcissists direct toward their targets in the early stages of a relationship. Constant messages, intense compliments delivered with apparent sincerity, declarations of deep connection made far earlier than the timeline of the relationship would normally support. The feeling, intoxicating and almost overwhelming in its intensity, of being the most important person in someone else's world. Most people who have not experienced a narcissistic relationship hear this description and think they would see through it immediately, that it would feel like too much, too fast. And for some people, it does. For people whose own emotional needs are largely met, who feel secure in their own worth, the intensity of love bombing triggers caution rather than connection. But for an empath, love bombing works differently. An empath does not simply receive the attention, they feel the emotion behind it in their own body. When a narcissist looks at an empath with apparent adoration, the empath feels that adoration as a real, physical, somatic experience. When a narcissist shares what seems to be deep vulnerability, the empath's own system opens in response, matching the intimacy, reciprocating the trust, because that is what empaths do instinctively when they sense genuine emotion in another person. The tragedy is that empaths are so precisely tuned to emotional authenticity that when something feels real, they trust it at a level that goes beyond rational assessment. And narcissists, through years of practice, have become extraordinarily skilled at performing the emotions that empaths most deeply respond to. By the time love bombing begins to fade, which it always does, the empath is already deeply bonded, already emotionally invested in the version of the person they experienced at the beginning, already explaining away the changes as temporary, as something they can help fix if they just try a little harder and love a little more unconditionally. Chapter 5. How narcissists use an empath's compassion against them. Once the love bombing phase has established the bond and the empath is emotionally committed, a subtle but profound shift begins to occur. The narcissist begins to use the empath's own compassion as the primary tool for controlling them. And because compassion is such a deeply held value for most empaths, something they have built their entire sense of self around, this particular form of manipulation is extraordinarily difficult to recognize from the inside. It begins with stories. The narcissist's difficult childhood, their history of being betrayed by people who came before, their struggles and wounds and fears, offered strategically at moments when the empath might otherwise be pulling away or questioning the relationship. Each story lands with full force in the empath's emotional system, triggering exactly the compassionate response the narcissist has learned to rely on. Then come the accusations framed as vulnerability. I knew you would leave eventually. Everyone does. I thought you were different, but maybe I was wrong. These are not honest expressions of fear. They are precision instruments designed to trigger the empath's guilt and compassion simultaneously, pulling them back toward the relationship and away from any growing clarity about what is actually happening. The empath stays, not because they are blind or incapable of seeing what is in front of them, but because their compassion is genuine, their love is genuine, and walking away from someone they believe is genuinely suffering feels, to an empath, like an act of cruelty they are not capable of committing. If this resonates with you right now, share this audiobook today with someone you know who is still inside this dynamic, still trying to love someone well enough to fix them. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can offer another person is simply the language to understand what is happening to them. Chapter 6. The Guilt and Obligation Trap. Why empaths stay too long. One of the most painful and least understood aspects of the narcissist-empath dynamic is why empaths stay in relationships that are clearly causing them harm, sometimes for years or even decades, beyond the point where the damage became undeniable. From the outside, this can look like weakness or poor judgment or an inexplicable attachment to someone who doesn't deserve it. From the inside, it feels like something entirely different. It feels like conscience. It feels like loyalty. It feels like love. Empaths are wired for fairness and reciprocity in ways that become a liability in relationships with people who have no intention of being fair or reciprocal. When an empath feels they have received something from another person, even something as intangible as early emotional intimacy or the sense of being truly understood, they feel a genuine obligation to give back in equal measure. This sense of obligation does not switch off simply because the other person has stopped being the person they were at the beginning. It attaches to the relationship itself, to the history, to the investment already made. And it pulls the empath toward continued giving long after the giving has stopped making sense. The narcissist knows this, at least instinctively, and uses it deliberately. Every reminder of what they have given, every invocation of shared history, every "after everything I have done for you," lands directly on the empath's sense of obligation and triggers exactly the guilt response the narcissist is counting on. The empath, feeling guilty for considering their own needs, returns to giving. The cycle continues. The empath grows more depleted. The narcissist's demands grow more extensive. And the gap between what the empath is giving and what they are receiving grows wider with every passing month. Leaving, for an empath in this situation, is not simply a practical decision. It is an emotional and moral crisis. It requires them to override instincts that have served them well in every other relationship in their lives. It requires them to choose themselves over someone they believe is suffering. This is not weakness. This is what it looks like when one of the most powerful human capacities, the capacity for genuine, selfless love, is turned against itself by someone who learned, long before they ever met you, exactly how to do that. Chapter 7. How empaths lose themselves inside a narcissistic relationship. There is a specific kind of self-loss that happens inside a narcissistic relationship that is different in quality from anything most empaths have experienced before. It is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It happens gradually, in increments so small that each one individually seems almost insignificant, until one day the empath looks around at their life and realizes that almost nothing in it reflects who they actually are anymore. The opinions they used to hold freely have been replaced by the opinions the narcissist approved of. The friendships that existed before the relationship have slowly quietly been eroded. The interests, the habits, the small daily rituals that once provided pleasure and grounding have been displaced by the endless work of managing the narcissist's emotional world. And the empath, attuned as they are to the feelings and needs of others, has poured so much of their extraordinary sensitivity into reading the narcissist, anticipating their moods, managing their triggers, navigating the emotional landscape of the relationship, that they have lost access to their own internal world almost entirely. They no longer know what they feel until they have first assessed how the narcissist will respond to that feeling. They no longer know what they want until they have determined whether wanting it will cause conflict. This is not weakness. This is what happens when an extraordinary human capacity for attunement is redirected over years from its natural purpose toward the single, exhausting task of keeping one person's fragile emotional system from destabilizing. It is a misuse of a gift, and recognizing it as such, clearly and without self-blame, is one of the most important steps on the path back to yourself. The self that was lost in this relationship did not disappear. It went quiet. It went underground. It learned to survive in a space that was not designed for it. But it is still there, waiting with extraordinary patience for the conditions that will allow it to surface again. Chapter 8. Breaking the Cycle. Why Empaths Keep Attracting Narcissists. One of the most painful realizations in narcissistic abuse recovery is discovering that the relationship you just escaped was not the first of its kind. That there was a pattern. That looking back across your relationship history, the same dynamic appears in different forms, with different people, wearing different faces, but operating on the same fundamental logic. This discovery can feel devastating. It can feel like confirmation of a fear many empaths carry quietly and privately, that they are somehow destined to repeat this, that their own nature makes them permanently vulnerable, that no matter how much they learn or grow or heal, the same kind of person will always find them again. This fear is understandable, but it is not accurate. Empaths are targeted by narcissists repeatedly because empathy is visible, because it signals warmth and generosity and emotional availability in ways that certain people have learned to recognize and approach. That part is largely outside the empath's control. What is within the empath's control is what happens after the initial contact, how quickly access is granted to the deeper layers of who they are, how early boundaries are established, and what happens when those boundaries are tested. How much weight is given to actions versus words in assessing whether someone deserves continued trust. An empath who has done this work does not become less empathic. They become more discerning. And discernment, held alongside empathy rather than in opposition to it, is one of the most powerful forms of self-protection available to any human being. Narcissists don't gamble. They calculate. And an empath who has learned to recognize the calculation in real time, before the bond is fully formed, before the love bombing has done its work, before the first boundary has been quietly tested and found undefended. That empath is no longer the easy target they once were. Chapter 9. How to protect your empathy without destroying it. The most common piece of advice given to empaths who have survived narcissistic relationships is some version of become less sensitive. Build walls. Detach. Stop feeling so much. Stop trusting so easily. Stop giving so generously. And while the instinct behind this advice is protective, the advice itself misses something essential about what empathy actually is and why protecting it requires something far more nuanced than simply turning it down. Empathy is not a volume dial that can be adjusted without consequence. It is a fundamental orientation toward other human beings, woven into the nervous system, expressed in the body, inseparable from the empath's deepest sense of who they are. Attempting to suppress it does not make an empath safer. It makes them less themselves, less alive, less connected to the very quality that allows them to experience the profound depth of relationship. That, in healthy form, is one of the greatest gifts of being human. What protection actually looks like for an empath is not the suppression of empathy, but the development of empathic boundaries. The ability to feel with another person without losing the distinction between their emotional world and your own. To be moved without being swept away. To care deeply without that caring overriding your own judgment about whether someone's behavior toward you is acceptable. This is a skill. It is learned, not innate, and it takes practice. It begins with the simple, daily practice of checking in with your own emotional state before attuning to someone else's. Asking yourself regularly, in relationships both new and established, does this person's presence in my life make me more myself or less myself? More expansive or more contracted? More clear or more confused? These questions, answered honestly and consistently over time, are among the most reliable guides an empath has to the health of any relationship. Your empathy is not your weakness. It is your greatest strength in the right hands. Chapter 10. Integration, the empath's greatest strength reclaimed. Everything in this audiobook has been moving toward a single destination, though perhaps not the one you expected when you first pressed play. You may have come here looking for an explanation of why this happened to you. You found that. You may have come looking for validation that what you experienced was real. You found that too. But the destination this audiobook has been moving toward is something larger than explanation or validation, as necessary as both of those things are. It is the reclamation of something that was never actually taken from you, even when it felt like it was. Your empathy survived. It is still there, still intact, still the most defining and most extraordinary thing about you, waiting to be used the way it was always meant to be used, in relationships that honor it, in connections that are worthy of it, in a life built around the full expression of who you actually are, rather than who someone else needed you to be. The narcissist who targeted you did not do so because your empathy was a flaw. They did so because your empathy was a treasure. Because they recognized, at whatever level of awareness they operate on, that what you carry is rare and valuable and extraordinarily difficult to find. They were right about that, even if everything else about how they treated you was wrong. You are not too sensitive. You are not too trusting. You are not too much. You are an empath, and the world needs exactly what you have to offer. The work ahead of you is not to become someone different. It is to become more fully, more carefully, or more wisely yourself. The relationship that brought you to this audiobook was not the end of your story. It was a chapter. A painful, costly, necessary chapter that taught you things about yourself, about human nature, and about the kind of love you deserve, that you could not have learned any other way. You are still an empath. You are now also something more. You are an empath who sees clearly, an empath who knows their own worth, an empath who understands the difference between compassion and compliance, between love and obligation, between staying because you want to and staying because you are afraid of what leaving will cost. That knowledge is permanent. That knowledge is yours. And no one, no matter how skilled they are at what they do, can take it from you now. Your empathy is not your weakness. It was never your weakness. It is your greatest strength. And from this moment forward, it belongs entirely to you. This has been Beyond Pages. If this audiobook gave you language for something you have been carrying without words, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe and turn on notifications. The next chapter is already waiting for you.